People tend to misunderstand this episode. You know, the one with Squidward and Spongebob turning into snails. As kids, some of us ran from the TV as soon as we saw the title alone. Others sat through it and walked away asking, what was that even about? I myself used to file it under the weird for the sake of weird category. But recently, I went back and watched every single scene, and the longer I sat with it, the more it became clear. The choices aren't accidents. There's a very specific reason this episode wants you to feel that way. One that's not really easy to catch, especially for kids. But don't worry, I solved it for you, and I'll gladly share. We'll turn this horrifying body horror episode into something that makes sense. And to do that, we'll have a look back from the beginning, back to the first bad decision that set everything in motion. The episode opens up with a warm interaction between SpongeBob and Gary. Gary's on the wheel doing his little cardio. SpongeBob calls him, scoops him up, then proceeds to play fetch with Gary. They also hug each other.
I love you, Gary.
Only the wholesome stuff. Suddenly, Patrick bursts in with the jellyfishing net, saying there's a convention in Ukulele Bottom. But SpongeBob hesitates at first because he can't just leave Gary alone for the whole weekend. So he asks Squidward, who shows up to complain about underwear on his lawn. Of course, Squidward doesn't want to, at least until he hears the words,
I guess we can't go away this weekend after all, Patrick.
Gone all weekend, and suddenly he's the world's most enthusiastic pet sitter. Notice how fast he accepts once he realizes the neighborhood will be quiet? He never cared about Gary in the first place. SpongeBob then runs through the instructions anyway, walking schedule, the labeled cans, and Squidward nods like he's listening. He's not. After 3 days worth of sun tanning, Squidward, who's lobster red, just remembers the one thing he was supposed to care for. So he panics and runs inside, but it's too late. Gary's already shriveled and wheezing on the floor. He tries to dump every can into the bowl, but Gary clearly couldn't eat any. Then, when he hears SpongeBob at the door, Squidward shoves the food into his own mouth just to hide the evidence. My guy would rather choke than confess. SpongeBob walks in, sees Gary, and everything goes cold.
Gary!
We cut to the vet rolling up in a shell-shaped van. The doctor takes one look and says,
This is definitely a snail.
Then he pulls out a pastel seashell syringe and says Gary needs a shot of snail plasma, and hands the needle to SpongeBob. Because apparently he won't do it, says he's too squeamish. Clock that, a well-educated vet refuses to do his job and passes the risk to a kid. This bad decision would later set the horror tone through the roof. Turns out, SpongeBob can't do it either. He's squeamish too. So Squidward tries to do it, but the moment he does it, SpongeBob yanks Gary away. Again and again and again, until Squidward slips and drives the needle straight into SpongeBob's nose. But they both shrug it off with that line that always jinxes every horror movie.
Trust me, SpongeBob, nothing's gonna happen to you. You're fine.
A beat later, Gary drinks some water, and then he's totally okay, which makes that handoff feel even worse. The cure was the easiest thing in the room, and the plasma hit the one person that didn't need it. Night hits, SpongeBob feeds Gary, and without thinking, eats the entire bowl himself. He burps, meows, and laughs it off. Said, I worry too much. But then his footsteps go heavy. The camera follows him into the bathroom, he stares into the mirror and tries to talk himself down. He keeps insisting he's fine because Squidward said he would be. That's the part that always gets me. He trusts the wrong sentence longer than he trusts his own body. This is when the show stops cracking jokes and starts slipping in the horror.
I take it back, Gary. Something is wrong with me.
And what follows this body horror montage is an even more disturbing classic horror trope. SpongeBob comes to Squidward's place and meows. Squidward opens the door, sees him, and gets terrified. He boards the door, boards the window, hides in the closet, then finally says the truth out loud.
None of this would be happening if I'd only fed that snail.
There it is, the confession the episode's been building toward. But SpongeBob just keeps coming. It's the nicest, scariest thing he's ever done. Squidward's house turns upside down from the panic, and to top it off, the snail plasma flies and tags Squidward too. Now it's SpongeBob, Squidward, and Gary on a fence, meowing a sea shanty into the night as a pack. It's funny again, but not the same kind of funny. That ending scene in particular feels like the show just toggled into a different genre for a minute. I still remember that ending vividly even years after I watched it. It's just weird. In fact, I'm not the only one who feels that way. This episode still gets a mixed response to this day. Some said it scared the hell out of them as kids, especially the bathroom transformation scene. Some say it's a terrible episode because of the weird theme. Some even go as far as saying this was the only bad episode from season 1. But for all the slime and the screaming, this episode isn't weird without meaning. In fact, this episode was built to feel wrong on purpose. Because this episode was intentionally made with a very specific idea in mind. One that most kids would never catch, but now we do. That last frame you're watching, the moon, the fence, the 3 silhouettes, was a clear signal. This episode wasn't structured like a normal SpongeBob. It was built following the structure of a monster movie. And not the loosely inspired or kinda similar. The title basically tells on itself. I Was a Teenage Gary is a straight love letter to I Was a Teenage Werewolf. Now the movie itself is pretty much an old school American science fiction horror. Basically, in the old film, a troublesome kid goes to a doctor for help with his anger issues. The doctor says, "Trust me," pulls out a serum, and turns him into something he can't control, a werewolf. The triggers are small, bells, phone rings, but once the change starts, he's gone. People get scared, someone gets hurt, and by the time the town figures out what's really wrong, it's already too late. That's the blueprint the episode follows. A kid in trouble, adults who fail their job, and a cure that becomes the curse. Now, jump back to Bikini Bottom with that in your head. The main plot starts with Gary getting neglected by Squidward and SpongeBob partially for trusting the wrong person. Then a professional rolls up in a themed van, diagnoses the problem, and refuses to do the one thing that would fix it. He hands the risk to somebody who doesn't know what he's doing, and worse, the shot goes into the wrong body. From here on, the jokes fall away immediately, and the bathroom mirror becomes a stage. Eyes shouldn't move like that. Legs shouldn't shrink like that. Language shouldn't break like that. And then, because the show loves a visual punchline, you get the moon and the little pack singing as the closure. By the way, that bathroom transformation scene was taken from the famous morph beats from An American Werewolf in London, which is another movie about werewolves. Another, by the way, I know for a fact that some of you are still wondering, what is snail plasma? How in the world could that thing turn someone into a snail? I did try to look it up on the wiki, and it said that the snail plasma is just basically a slime produced by sea snails used to move about. But if injected into another being other than a snail, they will turn into a snail, albeit only temporarily. So it's just a natural snail slime, the one that Gary produces every day. Then I guess the doctor isn't technically wrong with the diagnosis. Gary is sick because he's dehydrated and needs some hydration to cure it, with plasma or just by drinking water. But then by this logic, it means that anyone could turn into a snail temporarily just by chugging any snail slime? Huh? Anyway, while SpongeBob definitely follows the werewolf movie as a guide, there's a twist that makes the SpongeBob episode feel different from the movie it's quoting. The original story punishes the kid, while the doctor and the ones that bully him get killed in the process. At least they don't suffer the curse of being a werewolf. Meanwhile, Nickelodeon doesn't do that. Gary stays untouched. The curse lands on the people who failed him, the sitter who forgot to take care of him, and even the owner, SpongeBob, who trusted Squidward and the doctor because he wanted to leave. Another difference is that in I Was a Teenage Werewolf, Dr. Brandon is predatory. He crosses the line on purpose. In Bikini Bottom, the vet crosses it out by backing out. He knows what to do and refuses. Different sins, same outcome, the kid pays first. That's why the plot lands harder here. The curse doesn't punish the vulnerable, it bounces back to the adults who let it happen. If that sounds a little more kid-friendly, that's the point. I guess they had to give this episode some morals for the story. They can't just let the real villains go unpunished. Now, this also explains the haunting ending scene, the 3 of them chilling on the fence and meowing their souls away. It's the show putting on a Halloween mask for one night and trying to scare kids. Because unsurprisingly, this episode and its sister episode, Scaredy Pants, was aired for Halloween specials at the time. And I must say, they nailed the job perfectly. Kids were, in fact, scared by this episode. So if that's the plan, what's the message? Why build a kids episode around a classic movie and a haunting curse? Why make the funniest show on TV feel this wrong? Funny enough, the answer lies in how we reacted to it, and what the episode says about trust, caretaking, and the small mistakes that don't hurt you until they do. Part of why this episode sticks in so many kids' brains is because it breaks the pact we thought SpongeBob had with us. Usually when the world tilts and goes to hell, an adult will come and fix it. Take an example from the episode Hooky. SpongeBob and Patrick are being naughty, Krabs scolds them and teaches them a lesson. In Wormy, when the whole town panics, Sandy catches the butterfly and saves the day. Even in an episode like Ripped Pants, SpongeBob becomes a clown. Suddenly a few random fishes approach him and talk him out of embarrassment. Meanwhile here, every adult fumbles their job. The sitter forgets, the professional refuses, even SpongeBob believes the wrong person for a little too long. It's a chain of tiny choices that add up into a tragedy. And that's the point. The monster is everyone but Gary. Gary never does anything wrong. He gets sick, waits, and suffers in silence the way pets and kids do when the people in charge are sunbathing. I Was a Teenage Gary ironically shows us how easy it is to mess up a kid's environment, just because some adults are unwilling to take responsibility. It also teaches us a much more valuable lesson than neglect. If you remember feeling weirdly ashamed watching this as an adult, that is justified. The episode injects shame into every beat. Squidward would rather choke on a mountain of snail food than say, "I forgot." SpongeBob keeps repeating, "I'm fine," because someone told him he would be, even when his body is literally changing in the mirror. How long will we defend a bad decision because admitting it means facing a mess that we made? The funniest line in the whole thing might be the confession no one laughs at.
None of this would be happening if I'd only fed that snail.
Meow.
It's really a genius bit. The only pity from this story is that the doctor glides away untouched. I mean, if that dude was too squeamish to inject a snail with plasma, then he clearly shouldn't even be a veterinarian at all. But that also feels true to life. The person with the real power doesn't always pay. Sometimes the fallout hits the ones who trusted them. So, what do you do with this story as a viewer now? You stop treating I Was a Teenage Gary like a random fever dream, and read it as a Halloween creature feature about caretaking and, frankly, responsibility. Pets, kids, plants, projects. Anything depending on you will drift towards chaos if you just hand it to the wrong person and hope for the best. Neglect doesn't hiss, it doesn't knock, it just accumulates until it looks like a different face in the mirror, and suddenly you're meowing on a fence, wondering how you got there. Early SpongeBob is a different beast, huh? They could be fearless like that, silly on the surface, sharp underneath, and still send you to bed with a feeling you couldn't shake. Well, hold on to that thought, because once you notice the quality of this episode, it raises one more question we have to answer before we close. If Bikini Bottom used to hit this hard, what happened to that edge? I've covered that in my previous video about the sad fate of SpongeBob. Don't miss out. And as usual, see you in the next dive.